Hey everyone, welcome to episode 28 of the Miami Tech Pod. I'm Cesar, and we got the full squad back together. We got Will, Maria, and Brian with us, and some special guests this week. If you've been following anything in Miami Tech, you've heard the name Lula. It is a hyper growth, hyper exciting startup that is making some serious moves. That's Miami born and raised here. And we got Mateo and Michael Vega Sands with us on the pod. Guys, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having us.
First of all, is this your first podcast that you're doing, or have you made the rounds a little bit?
We've made the rounds a little bit. I would say I think this is my first Miami podcast.
Boom.
But, yeah.
Awesome, guys. Well, why don't we just start with the very simple. What is Lula? Why don't you tell the listeners a little bit about the company that you're building, the background of how you guys came up with the idea, and what we can go from there.
Yeah, absolutely. So thanks for having us, and I'll jump right into it. So at Lula, we're building the Stripe for insurance. And cool. So in the same way that Stripe's payment API eliminates the need for companies to build out their own payment infrastructure, Lula's insurance API and technology allows companies to eliminate the need for them to build out their own insurance infrastructure. And so by working with Lula, companies no longer need to deal with the insurance brokers. No longer do they need to build out internal insurance teams or departments, and no longer do they need to really build out their own insurance tools or systems. We're able to handle all things insurance for them, and we're able to do so via our API.
And, did you guys have a background in insurance before you launched the company? I know, Mateo, you and I have had dinner and you had some crazy stories on the early days, but you started as a car sharing service, right?
Yeah, correct. Yeah. We started off, and the story's quite funny. My favorite pizza is Papa John's pizza. And my second year in college, and Matthew too, we actually started off at Miami-Dade College, and then we both got a scholarship opportunity to go to Babson up in Boston. And really, it's about 14 miles outside the city of Boston in a small town called Wellesley. So one night I really wanted Papa John's pizza, but they wouldn't deliver to campus. And so I said to myself, wouldn't it be cool if there was an app that let me rent a car from another student to really go and pick up the pizza? And I shared the idea with Matthew, and he said, hey, why don't we actually build this thing? And so we created the ugliest app you've ever seen, but it was just good enough that it allowed us to rent cars from one another and other students on campus. And during that time, we came to understand just how tricky and broken the world of insurance was. And that was really our introduction to insurance. And so we don't have any formal background or any formal education in insurance. More so, what we came from is very much the school of hard knocks as it pertains to the world of insurance, and just really building out that marketplace and building out that platform and learning all the different intricacies of the world of insurance. That was really our education.
Yeah, and kind of just to piggyback off that, another interesting thing is like Michael and I also didn't have any experience in tech whatsoever. So like one of the unique things about Babson is it's strictly just business school. And Mike and I originally went there with the goal of ending up on Wall Street. Like we went to study finance and economics. And so that's what we wanted to do. Tech was something that we really didn't know until our 20s. Like I didn't know what an API was until I was probably 21 years old. Everything that I learned was from going to meetup Boston area, literally sitting in the library and just reading books. And so tech wasn't something that we knew either getting into this whole thing.
So you guys had some pretty early traction on the car sharing side, and then I believe it's like the pandemic just kind of put a halt to it. So how did it go from car sharing to InsurTech startup?
Yeah, so we first had the idea a few years back for the car sharing app. And around summer of 2017, we decided to get pretty serious about it. And we really started putting more of our time in. And by September of 2018, it really started to pick up. And we said, hey, you know what, let's launch this thing beyond the Babson campus and beyond the Boston schools. Let's launch publicly across the US. And we launched as the first and the only company in the US that allowed college kids as young as 18 to rent a car, really without any restrictions. And within 8 days, we became one of the top apps on the App Store. And 12 months in, we had cars available on more than 500 college campuses in all 50 states. And during that time, two really important things happened. Number one, through that journey, we were rejected by 47 insurance companies. And as you can imagine, no insurance company wanted to insure car rentals to 18-year-olds. And we said, well, what if they aren't just any regular 18-year-old? What if they fall within a certain risk parameter? And that was really the first time we ever developed any sort of underwriting methodology or underwriting criteria. And 12 months into the operations, we were growing at a very rapid rate, yet we had one of the lowest, if not the lowest incident rate in the industry. Yet we were renting to college kids, which traditionally were a very high risk demographic. And the insurance carriers we were working with were like, wait, maybe you guys aren't so crazy. And through all that, we had to get creative in how we actually went ahead and managed the insurance programs and the insurance protocols, right? And second to that, the demand, there was so much demand and the platform was really growing at such a rapid rate that we did not have enough cars to fulfill all the demand on the platform. So we began to partner with car rental companies. And the car rental companies, after a while, began to run a meaningful portion of their business on the platform. And one day they called me and they said, well, we really like the platform. We really like the app. And I'm like, yeah, isn't it amazing? It's a beautiful app, right? And they said, well, more than anything, though, we like the insurance infrastructure. And we're like, yeah, but the app is cool, right? Isn't it? And they're like, yeah, but we like the insurance infrastructure. And so Matthew very much started thinking about insurance and really started pushing me to pitch and really consider insurance. And really around that time, this was early 2020, right before the pandemic. At that time, one of the things that we began to realize is that if you looked at the company's vanity metrics, our vanity metrics were fantastic, but the actual core numbers, the numbers that really would make the business survive ultimately, they were always struggling, right? That was always a struggle.
It was very much like the whole Uber thing. Like Uber and Lyft, they had great KPIs in terms of new cities, new users, amount of rides being done on a daily basis, but they didn't necessarily have a viable path to profitability, depending on who you ask. And that was something that had really started to scare off a lot of investors, especially after both companies went public, because the main thought was, hey, you guys are growing like crazy, but if these two companies haven't been able to figure out a path towards profitability, how will you? And so they were starting to get scared. And that's why I kept telling Michael, I was like, InsurTech is an upcoming opportunity. If we just make adjustments to really start honing in on this insurance side of stuff, we won't have to deal with people being scared about Uber and Lyft because it'll be a separate industry. And then two, the unit economics on an InsurTech or a SaaS offering are much stronger.
Yeah, so this was early 2020, and this is actually a huge turning point for us right around the time, because early 2020, we start coming to this realization. We had just finished 6 months of due diligence with a group of investors, and they had been dragging out the due diligence process for quite some time. And when the pandemic hit, we had made the foolish error of really hiring aggressively before the money hit the bank and before these investors wired. And so we found ourselves in a situation where in the weeks leading up to the pandemic, the company was essentially running on fumes. These investors, we didn't know whether or not they were going to come in. Ultimately, they don't end up coming in. And so when the pandemic hit the company, or when the pandemic hit the world and college campuses were forced us to shut down our operations, we ran into a situation very rapidly where there was essentially no money in the bank account. And from our perspective, we were like, oh my gosh, capital markets have dried up. We owe people money. We don't want to shut down the company because we had all these early investors that believed in us, and I just could not bring myself to call them and say, hey, we lost your money. And the other thing that's funny, if there's anything funny in that story, is we have a sign in the office, which if you look at the TechCrunch article or the Miami Herald article, you see Matthew and I are in front of a Lula sign. That Lula sign for us signified life. And so Matthew and I just physically could not bring ourselves to bring it down. I feel like vomiting just thinking about that. But the whole time going through all of this, I was just like, we can't bring that down. We can't bring that down. And so as we're navigating all these tough times and trying to figure out how really we're going to continue and move forward, one of the things I kept thinking about was insurance and insurance and insurance. And so one of the things that enticed us...
Say a military story, or I can say a military story.
One of the things that enticed us about insurance is if you looked at the car sharing market in its entirety is a $3 to $5 billion market. Nobody's really been able to figure out how to create a viable or profitable business in terms of mobility marketplaces. And when you look at the world of insurance, today insurance makes up 11% of the US GDP. In the Fortune 100, 12 of them are insurance companies. And it's not a winner-take-all market, right? So it's clearly a viable and profitable business if you do it right. And so that was why insurance was all of a sudden becoming very enticing to us. And so as we're really thinking about insurance, in the middle of the pandemic, as things are really getting rough and bad for us, we get a phone call. And what ends up happening is that the US military was launching a car sharing program for their military personnel on their military bases. So think Turo and Get Around, but just for US military personnel. And so they got us on the phone and they asked us to bid out the project. And if you've ever seen the movie War Dogs, where you just have these two young guys saying yes to every question, that was Matthew and I. We were just saying yes to every question, even though we didn't know whether or not we could actually do it or achieve it. And so at one point, one of the questions they ask, and this is funny, is they say, oh, so how much is it going to cost? And I was like, oh my gosh, I don't even know. It's really not going to cost us that much. I hope they're not listening to this. But I was like, I hope, like, it's really not going to cost us that much. Like, we already have most of this built out. And so I let out like a pretty high number, and Matthew all of a sudden shuts the camera off, mutes the microphone.
I put it on mute, yeah.
Yeah, he just hits me and explicitly says like, what the F, bro? You just effed up the whole deal for us. There's no way they're going to bite for that. And we end up turning on the camera. We end up turning on the mic, and we're like, oh, so sorry, the laptop died. And they said to us, that price is actually great. If it was anything less, we'd be worried. And we were like, oh my gosh, we just underbid ourselves so much.
What ended up happening was on the insurance side of stuff, they had found carriers that were interested in bidding the program out, but they needed to vet drivers in a specific manner. They needed to administer the policies in a specific manner, and then they needed to manage claims in a specific manner. And they're like, we don't know how to do any of that. Can you guys help? And then that's when Michael all of a sudden thinks, he's like, man, insurance API, the way Stripe provides companies with their payment infrastructure, we'll provide companies with insurance infrastructure, and then we'll get paid a fee for doing so. And so like that was a whole catalyst. So once we saw how much could potentially be made by offering this insurance infrastructure, that's when the light went off. Other companies started hearing about the fact that we got the military deal. And then they started asking us like, hey, could we use your insurance infrastructure as well? And so we ended up launching a very rough version of the infrastructure API in August of 2020. It took off, and by November, we had our first profitable month, and we had investors really breathing down our necks, asking to invest for like the first time in our life. And so at that point, we started taking on a little bit of, we raised a decent sized seed round, but the business was so profitable at that point, we just kept pushing off everybody like, hey, we're not fundraising now. We'll do it at some point in 2021. And then that's what eventually, as we just kept getting more and more traction, Miami Tech Week comes in on April. And at that point, we had blown up. We had almost 2,000 companies on our waiting list. And then that's like what acts as a whole catalyst to really go to the next level and build the API company that's really building the insurance infrastructure for the modern economy.
So did you guys let those original founders who ghosted you back in, or have you iced them out forever?
No,
The original investors, I think you mean.
You're talking about the original investors. You know, I heard back from one of them. Recently, and he's actually upset that I didn't reach out to him again to let him know that we were raising. And I was like, well,
didn't you tell me that they replied to your original email that they never replied to? Now they're
so that's a few other. So that's actually a different story. So at this point, there were a good amount of investors that just responded to like one thing. If you take a step back and you go back to the car sharing days, fundraising was always very difficult for us, and that's why we never raised a lot of capital for it. And so oftentimes we found ourselves just cold emailing investors and just trying to figure out how to get their attention. And so when the news broke that we had raised this large Series A, there were quite a few investors that replied to the thread and were like, oh my gosh, I never saw this email, but happy you're doing well. Or like, wow, adding this company to my anti-portfolio. And so we had a few of those. That was quite comical.
Michael and I are probably we might have to boast the title of most rejected founders of all time. Because when we were doing the car sharing app, we would go crazy trying to raise. And I think like in April of 2019, when we tried to raise like our first institutional round, we went out to San Francisco, and I kid you not, these numbers are actually legit. We reached out to 532 investors. First 525 either ignored us or told us no. Investor 526 ended up being Plug and Play Ventures, took our quote email, invested in us, and then the rest of the 532 investors ended up passing. In 2019, we ultimately ended up having like more than 600 investors, very much the same situation, either ignored us or just passed on us. And that was just 2019 alone. So add 2020, 2018, and it's just a much longer list overall. But yeah, have to boast most rejected founders ever. And then it was funny because so many of them did what Michael just said. They responded on the same thread when the news broke.
That's so awesome. What an awesome story, and particularly inspiring. Look, startups, it's a messy road, and it's all about survival. My previous company, Live Ninja, our first investor was a local Miami angel investor. His name is Marco Gilberti. And he always said, the number one tip that I can give you guys is just stay alive. If you stay alive long enough, good things will happen, right? Just keep the company going, and you'll figure out a way. If you could just kind of keep the lights on, and it goes right into that story that you were saying. You couldn't bring yourself to take that sign down, right? That was kind of what was motivating you to kind of get through this tough phase, and you found the light, man. And I mean, I'm listening to these stories, and I'm freaking amped up and inspired by what you guys are doing. Insurance. I want to talk about insurance. I actually worked in the insurance industry before I jumped into entrepreneurship. I worked in financial services and insurance, more on the property and casualty side, even though I did some auto work too. What an antiquated industry, filled with antiquated processes. So I'm curious to get your perspective. What's it like working in that space with all of these big incumbents, all these big insurance companies, underwriters, corporations that are so used to this antiquated process? They're set in their ways, loss reports, filing, accord forms and things like that I was used to back, like 10 plus years ago. I'm just curious, what's it like? You're coming in, you're this new hot startup with this new technology. Has it been very receptive in the industry with all this new tech, or has it been a lot of pushback?
So early on, like back in 2018, there was a lot of pushback. And even like 2020, when Michael and I first came onto the scene, like really doing insurtech, it was something that a lot of the insurance carriers were skeptical of. And again, they'd see two 24-year-olds coming in, trying to actually telling them, hey, the way you guys are mitigating risk, assessing risk, and just managing your business is wrong. And so there was a lot of skepticism, like, hey, do they actually know what they're doing? And then we ended up running the program somewhat well, minimizing loss. And so once we had kind of the proof is in the pudding to show them, they started taking this more seriously. And Cesar knows this. We ended up, like Michael and I are very self-aware that young guys with really no gray hair getting into the insurance space is going to be hard to essentially gain credibility from. And so we had to surround ourselves with some really strong insurance people. So we started working with Curtis Scott from Lyft and a couple of people in his network. We were able to poach some people from over at AAA for our actuarial side. And so now when we've gone to the insurance company, it's like, hey, Michael and I know tech really well, and so does the rest of our team. And we're going to build out these solutions that are going to really be great and just modernize and make for more efficient processes. But on top of that, it's not just a bunch of techies that are thinking through all this stuff. Like, here is everybody that we have on the insurance side of stuff that's helping us think through all the different solutions we're building. And so having that combination has really been what's allowed us to go to the next level. And now we're at a point where the insurance companies are starting to open up the doors and engage in the conversation, because they're like, hey, if you guys have people that were able to help mitigate these losses and manage risk from the Uber and Lyft and shared economy side of things, and that understand the insurance side, but you're also pairing it up with great technologists who can build solutions on the fly, that's something that's really interesting. And you're starting to see a lot of these incumbents, they're trying to come up with their own innovative programs, and they're realizing it's going to take years and years and years to do it. And so partnering up with a company like Lula, who already has a solution built, is going to, one, save them a lot of money, and two, let them get a product out there much quicker and at a much lower cost than if they had to build it from scratch. So they're starting to open up quite a bit, and it's super cool to see it and be in the middle of it.
Yeah, shout out to Curtis. He's a good friend and former colleague. For the listeners and context on who these guys have tapped to kind of help them think through some of these problems. Curtis ran Uber's insurance program, and then he switched teams, so to say, and is now the vice president of risk at Lyft. And he is one of the brightest minds of insurance in the world, because he's helped those companies think through like a really, really hard problem, which is, these companies are not like low risk profile insurance buyers, right? They're actually quite the opposite. Uber does 15 million rides a day. So like there will be a lot of accidents every day on the program. So like, how do you run an insurance program that minimizes risk, minimizes premium spend, all of that? And I think Curtis is like, one of the few guys in the world that really understands everything from product to actuarial science to risk management, and is like a super great ally in your journey here. I'm glad you guys are working with him. And Maria's probably glad you guys are working with him too, because she's on the cap table, aren't you, Maria?
Yes, I'm very proud. Both, Florida Funders was one of the original investors, and I'm one of my first angel investments ever. I'm very excited. So I was very happy to be able to be part of it. Sorry, on the topic of your fundraise, you kind of started alluding to it when you said then Miami Tech Week happened. Can you kind of go back to that moment and how these big players kind of came in and led the round?
Yeah, absolutely. So the first thing I'll say about fundraising, which is, I'll say two things before we get into the actual fundraise, because I think it's important lessons for us. So the first thing is a big difference between the business we're building today versus the business that we built previously, or we tried to build previously, is, I think, and I took this straight from Jeff Bezos, so I'm not the smartest person. I'm not smart for saying this, but Jeff likes to say a company can be one of three things. So a company can be product obsessed, can be customer obsessed, or it can be competitor obsessed. And at Amazon, they choose to be customer obsessed, right? One thing I add there, and I think it's a pretty common thing in the world of startups, is I actually think there's a fourth category you can add on to that, which is, as it pertains to startups, I think companies can be fundraising obsessed. And so oftentimes what you find companies, and especially first-time founders, that are more obsessed with the headlines or the potential headlines and the fundraising amounts than they are with actually building a good business and solving problems for their customers, right? And that was a trap that we fell into the first time around. So when we made that pivot, one of the first things that Matthew and I, one of the first things we did was we said, hey, from our mind, our frame of mind, the way that we think about the business is going to shift. And so our first priority is customers. So we're going to become customer obsessed and really work to solve these problems. And then we're really going to work on how we can on how we can provide them value and then extract value in the form of actual cash, which essentially equates to revenue, right? And that's going to be the lifeline for the business. And so really just shifting our perspective from like fundraising obsessed to customer obsessed to actually getting revenue. That was a huge shift for us. And I think that helped us tremendously throughout the fundraise. The second thing that I think is important to note is, so obviously we raised a fantastic Series A, and we've been able to raise, and I think we have one of the best cap tables for a Series A company you can find today. And what's important to note is almost everybody or all the big name investors that are currently involved in the company at one point or another passed on us. And so the reason I think that's important for founders to understand is just because an investor passes on you or says no, doesn't mean they're actually passing on you or the business. They're just saying no at that time. And maybe they're saying no because the product isn't there yet, or the market isn't there yet, or as an executive, you are not there yet, right? So in terms of the fundraise, I'll get into that now, which is we very much were like focused on the customer and focused on solving for their problems and building based upon their problems. And then ultimately,
and building so that we wouldn't need building a business that wouldn't need funding was our goal going into it as well.
And so what's funny is before that, the first time around, fundraising was very difficult for us. It was nearly impossible. And we were building to try to appease investors and try to raise that capital. As soon as we turned the switch to, hey, let's focus on the customer. Let's focus on providing them a real life solution that really benefits them. And that's going to be our primary focus. And then we'll figure out revenue, and then we build up the revenue. As soon as we made the transition to that frame of mind, things just changed dramatically for us. The business started performing much better. We started getting more customers. We started getting more money than ever in terms of revenue. And now we find ourselves in a funny situation where there have literally been days where we do more in one day in terms of revenue than we did in the 4 years of the car sharing business, right? And so what's funny about that is that shift in the way that we saw things and the way that we actually built the business made fundraising so easy, even though we weren't actually thinking about fundraising on a day-to-day basis like we were historically. And so in terms of the fundraise, by August of 2020, we launch. By November, we become profitable. By December, there's some strong indications of product market fit. And we start seeing that Keith Raboy and Delian are potentially thinking about coming to Miami. And one of our first investors in the pivot was Lee Hauer from Next View Ventures. And he said to us, who do you guys want to lead your Series A? This was late November, early December. And we said, we'd like our lead investor to be Founders Fund, Sequoia, or Andreessen. And so he said, hey, Founders Fund actually works Founders Fund, some of the team is considering a move to Miami. Do you want an introduction? We were like, sure, absolutely. And so we spoke to them at that time. And one of the things they told us was like, hey, based off your traction, based off the market, based off the product, there's no doubt you're going to raise a Series A. Now, are you going to raise it from a tier 1 firm, a tier 2 firm, a tier 3 firm? That really depends on how the company executes moving forward. And so we knew that we wanted to raise from a tier 1. And so we said, you know what, let's push off the fundraise until we find it, or until we feel we're in a position where we can go ahead and raise from a tier 1 firm. And so between January and April, we were just very, very focused on the business. We were very focused on really really completing our objectives. And in terms of fundraise, we weren't very interested in talking to investors. And what's funny is around that time, a lot of different firms started to reach out to us. And sometimes we would entertain the conversation, or sometimes we just push them off because we were so focused on the business. And so by the time early April came around, there was so much pent up demand, and we were getting close to hitting our objectives, that when we hit our objectives and we said, hey, you know what, let's go ahead and let's kick off the fundraise, it was like perfect timing. Miami Tech Week was just right around the corner. There were all these different investors coming into town, and we end up meeting the folks from like Founders Fund again. We meet the team from Khosla. We meet the team from SoftBank. We meet Bill Ackman's people, right? So we met all these different people here in Miami Tech Week, and that was just like the perfect timing because we had just completed the 4 objectives that we wanted to hit before the fundraise. And then from there, the rest is really history.
You know, I one takeaway I have from like hearing you both speak is like you're both like students of startups, of entrepreneurship, which I appreciate. Yeah. Like I really appreciate the fact that you guys like aren't going into this sort of like directionless or sort of like let's throw darts at any wall, not even the dartboard, just at any wall, you know. And you seem to be very intentional about all the different moves you guys are doing. And like one of the things I'm curious about is like, what are the things you see as being sort of a positive or a negative to the fact that you're sort of planting your flag and staying in Miami, at least for now, you know, in relation to like how it's going to affect growing your business?
Yeah, I think kind of just to go off your first point, and like in terms of the intentionality, like Mike and I were growing up, we were huge. We played basketball. We even played college ball. And for us, Kobe Bryant was a person that we admired most. And like he was very much a student of the game, studying the greats before him, like Michael Jordan. And obviously, it led to a tremendous amount of success. So Mike and I took that same mentality in terms of when we decided to do a startup. And so the podcast that we had on replay were like how I built this, listening to the struggles of Joe Gebbia, Brian Chesky, Melanie Perkins, Whitney from Bumble. And we really studied everything that they did and try to emulate. And I think that's one thing that founders don't do enough. And it hurts them in the long run because they get so frustrated when something goes wrong or when a lot of bad stuff just happens in a row. And for us, the fact that we studied startups so hard, we were always able to stay positive because when something got bad, we were like, this is what should have, like, something bad was inevitably going to happen. So instead of crying about it, we just have to embrace it. And so that's how we thought about the whole thing. And in regards to the whole like tech scene in Miami and how we think about it, for us, it's a huge positive. And so when we company from Boston, everybody called us crazy for trying to build a tech company from Miami. I think, and it's funny because now Pinazzo is saying, hey, I know I gave you a lot of crap a year and a half ago for moving there, but should I come down to Miami? I think it's really great for the ecosystem. I think one is going to end up stimulating the local economy like never before. Not only are jobs coming through, but high paying jobs as well. And so it's going to be great for the local economy. I think also another big thing is like growing up in Miami, especially where like Mike and I came from, like the horse country in Kendall, close to Westchester area, like you don't necessarily see a lot of opportunities to go out and become millionaire at a young age or even just have generational wealth. Like that's not something that's just seen in those areas. And so now that tech is coming, I always call it the great equalizer because you can make a multi-million-dollar business that changes your life as long as you have Wi-Fi. You don't have to be 6'8" with a 48 vert. And the fact that people now in Miami are becoming more aware of those opportunities and how accessible they are, I think it's a huge net positive. And I think also like there's so much stuff going on in Latin America right now that if Miami as the hub that connects the United States and Latin America, it's just now we're going to be able to bring in more opportunities to Latin America that just help them push the needle forward. And now like with things that are going on in Cuba, you have a lot of these influential figures that are coming down here. They're witnessing the protests. They're seeing the pain of the Cubans in Miami. And so they're becoming more aware and they're being able to amplify their own voices. And so not only is it helping from a local economy perspective, but at the same point, just like with different social issues, it's helping push certain narratives in the right direction. So it's been great to see overall.
Is that why you guys have your headquarters in Kendall out west?
No, man. Honestly, no lie. The reason we're out west is we just got a really good price on the office space.
Love it.
It's right off of the Palmettos. So if somebody wants to come from the Wynwood Edgewater area, it's actually a pretty quick drive.
Love it.
A company that just raised a huge Series A round of funding is still cautious about their space. This is very rare.
Yeah. So you know what's funny about that is, and this is going back to Brian's point, which is I saw a tweet recently by Jason Lemkin from SaaStr, and he's like, just because you raised $20 million doesn't mean you need to act like it. And that's the mentality that we're building here in the company. So like we don't even pay for Zoom, and people are like, oh, why don't you pay for Zoom? I'm like, well, Google Meets is free. Like it does the job. So we're trying to embed a frugal mentality within the company. Now that's not to say we're not going to pay for talent. I mean, we're paying for talent right now as competitively as any company in the Valley will. But for things like that, we certainly are frugal.
Let's talk about
we're
part of
poaching
that.
talent, but still fly Spirit.
Yeah.
I think part of that is also like being a Miami raised company. Like for so many companies here, the spirit of having to get to cash flow sooner rather than later is like burned into you because you never know if you're going to be able to fundraise, right?
Yep.
Whereas in the Valley, you get lazy or you get comfortable, right? Because you know that like the funding will be there if you burn through all your cash. Whereas in Miami, you got to hustle, right? And like it's like etched into our spirit, like our ethos, and so I see that in you guys.
Yeah, Brian, it's funny. It's like that's so true. So Matthew and I still have PTSD from when we had literally 15 months ago negative $2,000 in the bank account, which, by the way, I didn't even know bank account could go that negative. And when we had to sell our car to like pay back some of the employees. Matthew, I'll tell Matthew to send you a picture of us going to the auto shop right next to the office and getting those plastic rims to see if that would allow us to get more money at CarMax when we would sell the car, because we didn't have a hubcap on it. So like that's still very recent for me. And so I'm petrified of ever going back to that, right? And the second thing there is and just following up on your point, Matthew and I were actually having the conversation with Delian. Delian just recently joined our board. And one of the things we were saying was we love hiring people from Latin America. And he's like, why is that? And I said, well, you hire somebody straight from the Valley and they see that the business is losing money. And one of the things that we do on a weekly basis is we have weekly business reviews. So every single department across the company has certain metrics that they need to keep track of. And so we measure that not on a monthly basis or on a quarterly basis. We actually measure that on a weekly basis. So every Wednesday at 1 p.m., we have a weekly business review where our department heads get together and we walk through the numbers of each department and see how things are going. And so one thing that's funny is we see that the people that have not been previously aware of this Silicon Valley ethos of lose money, eventually you'll be able to raise it or you'll be able to monetize. We have some of these people from Latin America that are like, oh my gosh, you guys lost how much money last month? Or our profits were only this little? Like, we need to get our act together or the company's not going to exist in 6 years. They're not used to this fundraising mentality. And so that's why I love hiring people from like Latin America. If revenue's not growing rapidly, they're freaking the heck out. If money's not coming in through the door from a customer, they're freaking the heck out.
They're probably also not demanding all like the nice perks that like, oh, you don't pay for my laundry and you don't have an on-site chef for me here.
Yeah, exactly. They get a salary, they get treated well, and that's pretty good for them.
And equity in the company.
And equity.
Of course. Let's talk about talent really quick, right? We saw some news this week. The Next Miami reported, and so did others, that the number of testings in the city are quite large, right? This year, Miami actually added 3,300 new tech jobs. It was the number one market in the country in terms of that growth, just 700 in the last month. How are you guys first react to that a little bit? We're all kind of like from here, and that's all. These are crazy numbers to us. But how are you guys thinking of like hiring as the goal right now? Because I gotta imagine a lot of the $18 or $20 million is going to be deployed to getting the right people in the door to help scale the business.
Yeah. So that number was very, honestly, I loved it. Like, it excited me. It was very comforting to see. I think one thing that we've seen, and just the nature of the company, is we are trying to build a company that's flexible in terms of hybrid. So how do you build a flexible hybrid workforce in this remote/physical world? And I think one of the things that we want to embed at the company is, hey, just given our experience, and this is something I feel strongly about, innovation and movement just happens at a completely different pace when people are in the office at least a few days out of the week. So we're not saying 5 days out of the week, but if you're seeing your team members 1 or 2 or 3 days out of the week, things just move at a different rate, or you just do see large innovation happening, whereas you might not see that on Zoom, right? And so for us, when I saw that number, I was like, fantastic. To me, it really excited me, because as a company that still strongly believes in the merit of physical workspace and physical workforce, I was like, great. There's a lot of talent coming in here. That talent likely will be open to the workforce and the work culture that we're trying to create, right? So for me, that number, and just seeing the amount of people coming to Miami and interested in actually working with a team in person, to me, I thought was fantastic. Now, that's not to say we're not flexible. So if we find somebody outside of Miami that has no interest in moving to Miami, and that's the only way we'll get them to work with us, and we feel like they're too valuable to not really take, or to not really get them to join the team, then of course we'll go ahead and we'll be flexible with them. But in terms of that number excited me. I think
honestly, and I don't even think I think this is just the beginning, because I think the one big thing that a lot of people still are asking is like, hey, is Miami Tech legit? Is this just a phase, or is it actually here to stay? And so I think Miami's going to prove itself out. I think we have a lot of really exciting stuff going for us. And so I think like true wave is actually going to come in a couple of months, once people see, okay, this is actually legit. They're starting to get big, heavy players. They're actually starting to see that companies can grow at a rapid pace. And so once I think we prove that out, I think the floodgates are just going to come. I think this is really just the beginning for Miami. As great as those numbers were, I think they're only going to get better.
What roles are you guys hiring right now?
Engineering, a lot of engineers, operations side, customer support, and then sales. And so we are putting an extra emphasis, especially on the customer support and sales side of things, on people who speak multiple languages. So if you speak Spanish, Creole, French, and English, any of those things, that'd be great for us, because we see a lot of small business owners in the industries that we're in right now speak those primarily.
Great. And shifting to one more thing that's kind of coming up here and on the radar of a lot of folks in Miami Tech is Miami Hack Week. And I understand you guys are sponsoring a house. Is that right?
Yeah, it's a beautiful house out in the Grove. So
wait, it's not a horse farm?
No, it's not a horse farm. This one it's a super, super nice modern house, has a beautiful pool, even has a gym. So it's going to be a fun week.
And what's the goal there? I mean, I know, for those that don't know, it's, Miami Hack Week is being organized August 1st through the 8th. Basically, a bunch of people are sponsoring different houses to go hack on and build some type of project, and then, show the prototype at the end of the week. What do you guys want out of this? What's the biggest kind of goal for you all?
Yeah, I think the knock on Miami historically has always been, hey, Miami does have strong sales talent. Miami does have strong operations talent. Miami does have very strong non-technical people in the workforce there. But Miami does not have engineers. Miami does not have strong technical talent there, or Miami is not nerdy enough, right? And so for us, the goal at Miami at this hackathon, or this week of the hackathon, is very much to bring engineering talent to Miami, bring them from all over the United States, show them, hey, this is not just a one-off event, or this is not just a trend. Miami is here to stay, and there's actually a lot of talent. There's a lot of opportunity. There's a lot of good, robust companies being built out here in Miami. And so our hope is that we can bring engineers from around the country, introduce them to Lula, introduce them to other exciting companies here in Miami, introduce them to local technical talent and ops talent and sales talent, and really see, hey, this is not a trend that's going away anytime soon. Miami is here to stay. And if you're interested, come work with a company, either that be Ramp, or that be Lula, or that be one of the other companies sponsoring. But ultimately, it's really to show, hey, Miami's here to stay, and you should actually consider coming and working for one of the companies down here. And hopefully,
and kind of just to piggyback off that, we've had a couple of people that have asked us like, hey, like, what are your thoughts like on ramp getting another house? Are you guys like fighting for engineers to come into your houses? Do you essentially feel like do you feel threatened by the fact that all these other companies are also getting super nice houses and stuff? And I tell them no, like I want the engineers to get exposed, not just to Lula, but I want them to see what ramp is offering. I want them to, if they get the opportunity to meet Andrew Parker from Papa, to meet the team over at A2, I want them to know that it's not just Lula that's down here, but it's this whole influx of really strong, incredible companies and founders. That way they're able to see firsthand, like, hey, Miami has some really brilliant companies that are doing some exciting stuff. And if I don't necessarily want to do insurance APIs, I can still go out and do some other really exciting stuff too. And so in terms of exposure for Lula, it's going to be great, but I'm also even more excited for the exposure they're going to get to the other companies in the area.
Yeah, the last thing I'll say on that is, so if you're a Miami engineer or you're technical talent here in Miami, I'd say still apply to our house. And you might be asking or telling yourself like, well, I live in Miami, I have a house in Miami, I have an apartment in Miami. Why would I go stay at a house there? And I'm like, well, it's going to be extremely fun. It's going to be a great learning and networking opportunity. And we'd love to meet you. So if you're from Miami, don't be afraid to apply or don't be afraid to reach out. We'd still love to have you in the house. And if you want to go back home at night, great. You get to hang out there all day and really work with some cool people.
So as someone who's like helped organize a bunch of hackathons, participated in a bunch of hackathons over the years, I'm kind of curious, and I've heard from various people that you guys have a very hacker mentality when it comes to like getting shit done. Like what's going to be your sort of like shortcut or hack in order to get more attention to your house and to your projects and all this stuff?
Yeah, so we've decided to take the approach of hiring. We've decided to essentially treat it as a sales strategy. And so what we find is a lot of people in their sales approach are quite lax. And we said, you know what?
In their recruiting approach.
In their recruiting approach are quite lax. We said, hey, let's treat potential talent as though they're our customers. And that same obsessive nature that we bring to the customer, let's go ahead and bring it to potential talent. And so we literally have a full go-to-market strategy around how we're going to go recruit talent and how we're going to make Lula a place that talent wants to come and join.
So am I going to see a billboard for the Lula Hack House on I-95 coming up or in San Francisco? You know, like, I mean, I think you should take over that billboard that the Shervin paid for to promote Mayor Suarez back in January in San Francisco and replace it with, you know, come to Miami and hack with us or something.
You know, Brian, I'm not gonna lie. Billboards had not been anything we thought about, and now as you're saying it, and I'm saying I might, I'm like serious, I might.
So I'll give you my tip on billboards. Since you guys love programmatic interfaces for things, check out AdQuick, which lets you buy on like sort of self-serve and buy digital billboards all over the country. So you could target areas where you think, you know, your engineering talent might be hanging out and just like sort of a guerrilla market to them this.
Come work on the future from here. And it's just like a picture of the beach, right?
I'm already slacking it into the team chat. So you're gonna see it.
This is awesome, man.
Wait, so where can people find out more about your house specifically? Like, is it on MiamiHackWeek.com? Like, drop your plug, man. This is your shot. Shoot your shot.
Yeah. So the house is going to be called. The house is called Lula Casa, or no, Casa Lula.
No, you mean Casa Lula?
So one of the places right by our office is Casa Cua, and so we're just like, let's call it Casa Lula. So it's Casa Lula. What we'll do is we'll share with you the link for the house. And
we're still making the website.
Yeah, we're still making the website. Which by the time this podcast launches, the website will be up and running. And
all right, this is your. Oh, that's a good question, Maria. Is Casa Cua
catering it?
So we are having a Cuban night at the house. So if anybody wants to come enjoy what a real Cuban meal looks like, croquetas, tequeños, tostones, literally everything. you're all invited to get a taste of what it's going to be like.
Dominoes, played, everything.
Love it.
I'm gonna vote for a Cajachina, but
oh man, that would be a move.
I mean, no one else is gonna compete on that level, you know.
No.
So
no. Yeah, we definitely, for us, one of the things that we want to put on like the advertising thing is like, hey, come experience what Miami is like with some Miami locals. So literally want to do all that. Maybe even require people to put guayaberas on for a night. Who knows?
Oh, I love it.
I got two. I'm just saying. I may roll up into the Lula hack house with a guayabera.
I'm pretty sure Swag Up can get you some Lula branded guayaberas made for this hack house for the whole crew.
Dude, they're not paying. Hold on. They're not paying for Zoom. They're not going to drop hundreds of thousands of dollars on custom guayaberas for.
How expensive are these guayaberas that you're buying, Cesar?
Custom? Man, guayaberas are bougie.
Yeah, not hundreds. Definitely thousands of dollars if you at scale.
That's the biggest Cuban flex.
Exactly. Guys, this was an awesome conversation. We could do this for hours, but we know you got to, get to building the company, building a hack house, all of that. So thanks for joining. This was a really great insight into your journey, into Lula as a company. We can't wait to see what the next couple of chapters in this journey are for you.
Thank you so much.
Awesome. Appreciate it so much.
All right. This was episode 28 of the Miami Tech Pod. Make sure to hit us up on Twitter, like and subscribe to the show. And we will be with you next week with some really exciting guests. And thanks. Have a good weekend, everyone.